Britain's democracy is under fire from Facebook. A parliamentary inquiry has claimed the British public is being increasingly manipulated by a campaign of disinformation and fake news on social media, a growing crisis which threatens the UK's democracy. The Digital, Culture, Media and Sport Committee of the British Parliament has revealed it believes social media manipulation has influenced the public on major issues, including the 2016 Brexit referendum. The inquiry concludes that British voters were being targeted in social media, saying it had received disturbing evidence of hacking, disinformation and voter suppression in elections since 2010. The committee has urged the government to ensure that the National Crime Agency thoroughly investigates these allegations, following months of investigation into the negative impact of social media giants like Facebook. These followed revelations that an ineffective privacy safeguard in Facebook had helped British consultancy group Cambridge Analytica to manipulate users' data for political reasons. It has been stated that Facebook remained unwilling to cooperate with investigations which seek to protect the public from similar data breaches in the future. Facebook has hampered our efforts to get information about their company throughout this inquiry, the committee claimed, adding, "It is as if it thinks that the problem will go away if it does not share information about the problem and reacts only when it is pressed." The report also stated that Facebook had provided witnesses who were either unwilling or unable to give full answers to the committee's questions. And all the while, the public remained vulnerable to further breaches of their privacy and data. Does the public believe that there was Russian meddling in the Brexit referendum? And what dangers does fake news pose to UK politics? Simple questions with important answers. Does the public think that social media has the power to manipulate UK politics? We asked them. This is what they said.
I'm beginning to believe it does, judging by all the reports in the newspapers at the moment, yes. So I'm a bit worried about Facebook and all these other media programs that have come out and so on.
I think that social media can lead to more extreme views on politics because of the fact that you're not actually seeing facts. You can just see opinions and strongly stated opinions that could come across as facts on social media.
That's what everybody's reading nowadays, it seems. Everybody, they've stopped buying newspapers. Not everyone, but a hell of a lot of people are just going on Facebook, Twitter, that kind of thing.
I mean, you see all of the online campaigns and surveys, that kind of thing. I think it has a massive effect.
Yeah, I do. People listen to what people say on social media. I do, yes. I do think they read what people say.
It's affecting everything.
Not really. It all depends on the age. Like, a lot of our youth, millennials, it impacts them a lot more than us older ones.
Social media can manipulate a country's politics by changing the minds of stupid people very easily.
Manipulating people's views. If people aren't having a balanced diet of different views from different papers or different sources, then they're very easy to manipulate.
With the Cambridge Data Analytica scandal, it's pretty obvious that the big platforms are a bit scared about, limiting free speech when, it's obviously like corrupting things.
Oh yeah, definitely, because they can literally post whatever they want, and for some reason people tend to believe it because they just see something and they go, well, it must be real because it's on a screen.
It's quite extraordinary the degree to which social media has transformed politics in this country and indeed in the United States and other places as well, because basically it's changed the whole dynamic between politicians and the public, the people who vote for them or who don't vote for them, who to a certain extent are able to hold the politicians to account by demanding engagement, and very few politicians refuse to engage.
Of course it does. Theresa May last year proposed a new bill which would bring about censorship on the internet essentially. The British government is worried about how social media impacts the political discourse. Whether it's good or bad for the British government is neither here nor there now. The British government realises that social media can gain traction very quickly. In relation to the political narrative at the moment, we've seen it's been used to bolster fascism in this country. It's been used to bolster the far right. And also the far left are finding some ground on there, Corbyn supporters and the like. Those like me, who have been censored on social media, it goes to show you that any time they see you going against their narrative, they can shut you down. There is no limit to what they can do to you. So the government has control on it. It's not the ideal situation for them. They would rather it not be there, but it is there, so they're going to use it to their own ends.
UK authorities have been looking for signs of Russian meddling in the 2016 Brexit referendum. Does the public believe that there was Russian involvement in that referendum, and why?
No, I don't personally think they're involved. I think people are just fed up with the European Commission. They're fed up with having two places, Strasbourg and Brussels, and wasting all this money. So I think they're just pretty well fed up with interference from the European side of things. We want to go our own way, basically.
I do think that's possible. I do believe that the Russians have interfered in the Brexit referendum as well as the United States election in 2016.
Don't believe a word of it. I think they're just trying to demonise Russia for some, like this ridiculous poison story. I think it's all the same. And this thing with Trump, I think I've got no proof. Someone says a hill of beans, there's nothing there. For some bizarre reason, they want to conflict with Russia for some reason.
I mean, it's credible, I suppose. There's all of that research to suggest that they influenced the American election, but I don't know how that applies to here. I've not seen any evidence.
Yes, definitely. I do think they have trolls, as they call them, on the internet, and I do think that those influence because politicians think they read real people's opinions, but I think they read the Russians.
Of course, they were meddling. They were.
It's hard for me to. I just didn't see it. I mean, I didn't vote for you know who, but I didn't see that. So I don't think I don't truly think they meddled. I mean, if they did, they meddled with vote counts, but I don't think social media meddling had anything.
I would assume there's been Russian meddling, but I'm not an expert, so I wouldn't want to say for sure either way.
I've not heard of any. I don't know.
I think it's got some ground. I think it was like a test platform for the US election. It wouldn't surprise me if something came out like that. I don't think Russia has got a big interest in kind of meddling in European affairs, so yes.
What we do know, and it's a rather murky overall picture, is that there are Russian bots, as they were called, and all of us in politics were followed by Russian bots. I lost 150 last month when bots were removed. Donald Trump lost 300,000. And basically, these bots were putting out material which would favour the leave argument in the Brexit referendum. So some of them certainly came from Russia, others, who knows?
As to whether or not there was actual meddling by the Russians, I don't know. Britain, since the end of the Second World War, has been pointing its fingers to Russia. It has tried to scapegoat onto the Russians. If it's not onto the Russians, they do it to somebody else. This idea that there's this big bad Russian boogeyman is just nonsense. Britain has been meddling in foreign affairs since its inception. In Iran, just recently, they tried to meddle in their elections. They were telling people who they should and shouldn't vote for on the so-called BBC Persia network. They've been meddling in Russian affairs for decades and decades. Since the whites in Russia went against the Reds, they've been doing it. In this country, they tell you who you should vote for in Russian elections. So how can Britain get on this high horse and talk about supposed Russian meddling when it's interfering in Russian and Iranian affairs? The British overthrew Mossadegh. Not only overthrew him, but they put coded messages out on the BBC to the Shah of Iran. So Britain cannot get on his high horse. What's good for the goose is good for the gander in this sense.
What dangers does fake news pose to UK politics? Is what the public thinks.
I think we're not feeling that we're getting the right sort of information. Someone can put out something there that is totally scandalous, and we just don't know the real facts. So I think we used to rely on the good old British newspapers, and we're getting worried now. Where do we get the real information from?
I believe that fake news is extremely dangerous. I think that it's one of the greatest problems that Western democracy faces today, because we have such a large, at least in the United States, and from what I've seen also in the UK, there's large populations of uninformed people that really have no idea what's actually going on and what the actual problems are.
Well, who's fake and who's real? I don't know what the difference is. You know, news on the internet or news in the newspapers, it's always someone's point of view, regardless. That's what I think.
Yeah, it can do. Well, that's exactly the methodology they used in America by the sound of it.
A lot of dangers because it influences people's opinions in the wrong way, and politicians listen to those people, and they make the wrong decisions because they are informated wrongly.
It gets people angry at each other, and everybody should be peaceful and nice to each other.
You know, even outside of politics, I've seen fake stuff impact things. So if it can impact someone else, like sports stars, it can even impact politicians. So people believe the most incorrect things when they go to the poll, and if they don't do the research.
Fake news is official propaganda, and it turns into a fascist state. So I feel like we're already beyond the end of democracy.
Oh God, it's the same as manipulating opinion. I mean, how do you know who to believe? But if people believe it without questioning it, then it's really dangerous. You know, I've got a young daughter who's just about to start out on, with using a smartphone, and we're having to educate her about all of this. You know, checking sources, making sure you trust what you're reading.
I think the more it goes on, the more the general public will not know what's fake and what's kind of real news. And so the lines will get blurred, and you'll end up in a world of alternative facts, which is not proper facts.
Just because they make people believe things that aren't true, and that's just wrong, really. Yeah, just making people vote for the wrong things and all that sort of stuff.
One of the most disturbing things for journalists is the way that we now have a distinction between objective news reporting, the sort of thing that the BBC at least used to do in the past, and so-called fake news, which is basically the deployment of alternative facts as they were described by the White House press department. In other words, the idea that there isn't just truth, there are things that are true if you believe in them and say them loudly enough, and of course President Trump is the best example of that.
Well, what is and isn't fake news? It was a term popularized by Donald Trump when he was branding CNN fake news. Every news network has its own slant, has its own bias. The British themselves, the BBC is a public state network. It takes its line on foreign affairs, certainly from its security services and the British Army. So who is to say what is and isn't real? It's used now to essentially point at people, to shut them down, to make them look untrustworthy, when the biggest purveyors of fake news are the British state and their cohorts. It's no good for people to go, you're simply fake news. Where's the proof that I am fake news or you are fake news? Everybody has their own bias and their own slant.
The facts behind Facebook tell their own story. Every second, there are 20,000 users on the Facebook site. Every minute, 1.3 million pieces of content are shared on Facebook. And every hour, Facebook receives about 198 million posts. The total number of users on Facebook exceeds 1.4 billion people. The report states that Facebook was still unwilling to cooperate with investigations that seek to prevent data breaches in the future. What are the public's thoughts on this?
Well, I'm very concerned about that. I think they should be brought to book, basically, and something should be done about it.
I think that's horrible. I think that every company that plays a part in the problem should also play a part in fixing the problem. And I think that if Facebook is unwilling to help the British government to find out what actually happened with the Brexit referendum, there should be some kind of repercussions.
They're not prepared to do anything about that. Well, I think they should. They should be prepared to do something about it. I would have thought they have to. I presume that's what all these adverts are about recently.
It's a tricky subject. It's a complex subject. I don't know. I mean, obviously they should be protecting our data. We should also be a bit more careful about the data we're giving over. They should make it a bit more transparent what they're doing with it.
Yeah, I think Facebook has a lot more to say, and a lot more information they're putting behind their backs, and I think we need to learn a lot more about what they're actually doing with our data.
Facebook has a lot of control, and Facebook, it's fine to, but it affects children especially and teenagers, yeah.
I think Facebook should cooperate as much as possible, but then again, I mean, shutting them out, I guess they're believing that, hey, we'll never allow this to happen again. So there's probably something more there, but as long as they can't force Facebook to do any further, we're stuck.
I think Facebook is only in it to make money for itself. It's Mark Zuckerberg's company, and he's in it for him.
They need to make it really clear as to how the data is being protected. If people know that, then they can make their own decisions. And if they know that their data is not protected and is being sold to other companies like Cambridge Analytica, then they may choose to act differently. But I think it's all about being open with it.
They should do a similar thing where these big tech companies were fined like huge amounts for, other similar things. Some of that can wake them up to the fact that they need to come to these committees and answer the questions for the British public.
I think Facebook's the devil. Pretty much. I mean, it's good for photos and things, but I just think they are twisted and they post so much wrong stuff and, yeah.
I think Facebook really has to face up to the fact that the name of the game has changed since Mark Zuckerberg launched this basically student-based operation. It now is a huge global player, and without doubt it is being manipulated by certain people through the placing of Facebook ads and the invention of Facebook pages to which people then sign up and which maybe then by which they are then fed false messages and propaganda, quite basically. And I think it is really alarming for the political process in democracies like Britain that you have a situation where a social media platform is so powerful and then the man behind it won't appear before Parliament. That really challenges a fundamental principle of democracy in this country, that nobody should be above the law, nobody should be unable to appear in Parliament and justify what they are doing. And frankly, it would be in his own interest, because by not appearing, he appears guilty.
I think, firstly, I'm not sure if I believe it. I believe Facebook is under the control of the security services. All social medias, all of these big internet giants, whether it's Twitter, Google, Facebook, they will all have to play ball with the security services. Indeed, they will have to meet the CIA, MI5, MI6. They're not above the law. They're not these supervillains. At the end of the day, Facebook met with Israeli officials last year, and the Israeli officials told them which Palestinian Facebook accounts they should shut down. So the idea that they don't play ball, they don't cooperate, and if they go against the grain, they do. They will work with the West. They will not come out and say, we are doing this on this behalf, but that came out. They were meeting with Israelis, deciding who they should shut down. They let some of them stay, which is interesting, the less resistance-based ones, the war ones that were calling for resistance, shut down, gone. And they continue to be shut down. Anybody who goes against the grain of the West, Facebook will play ball. They have to. It's the security services at the end of the day run these countries. These companies are not above the state, no matter how much people want to try and make it out to be the case.
What should be done to ensure that social media does not unduly influence voters and politics in a nation?
I'd probably have to legislate. I think that's the only answer, really, to legislate and stop it that way.
Honestly, I don't. I think that it's a problem that we have to learn how to live with, and over time I think it will get better because people will become more adept to social media and will be able to understand the difference between real and fake news as it more encroaches upon our society, I guess, and becomes a part of normal life. I think that it will just become normalized, but yeah.
No, I don't think you can stop it. The genie's out the bottle now. I don't know how you would stop it now, but yeah, that's progress.
A huge amount, really. I don't think it's all too powerful, and it's if we're all using it and it's sat in all of our pockets, I think it's always going to be hugely influential.
I think it's the people need to learn really to distinguish fake news from real news. So and then they really could start a real discussion with politicians. But if they keep believing everything they see on Facebook, on social media, it will never really be a good interaction.
I guess they have to have some way that they don't have political advertisements on there. Somehow they can do that.
It's very difficult. Freedom of speech, you know, even if it's a lie. So it's very difficult to try and regulate those postings. I think official sites can't post anything fake. So I think that's what users should have to. Just like going to a website where you buy stuff, don't go to a website that's not official.
I don't think you can prevent fake news because that's just advertising. So we should treat news more like advertising as consumers, and that we're buying advertising, we're not buying actual information.
I mean, maybe it is down to the schools. Maybe it's down to helping children learn how to spot fake news and to spot bias. So as they grow up and as they become adults, then they can apply that and they can teach other people. I don't know how you're ever going to police it, how you're ever going to stop it. So I think it is that education.
I guess you need to get the tech companies to buy into it. I don't know whether there can be anything done with the artificial intelligence stuff, but if you keep running the elections and referendums without addressing this, then the more it could corrupt the outcome. So something needs to be done, but I guess the tech companies are a major player in it.
Yeah, like they post about everything under the sun that for a lot of like age-wise as well, people shouldn't be seeing that sort of thing. Yeah, they should just have the full facts before anything is allowed to be posted.
I think we have to accept that social media can't be put back in its box. It's there and it's probably going to grow rather than shrink. There'll be some platforms that become more popular than others, as we've seen already with things like MySpace, which almost disappeared. But basically, politicians and indeed the media have to come to terms with living in a world of social media and try to apply the sorts of judgments that, for example, a news agency like Reuters does, where you must have two justifiable, reliable sources before you put out any piece of news or information. And that's the real problem with social media. For much of it, there is no editorial control. In fact, there's no control whatsoever. People can say and propagate whatever they like. And whereas that's great fun for members of the public and indeed for many politicians, it's really dangerous as far as reliable news is concerned and the people who consume it.
It's impossible, frankly. Social media is too big now. They've let it run away. That said, the government can start setting up its own social media platforms. It can start funding groups that have popularity. It can start putting groups that play to its tune in the public eye. In the sense of Britain first, to a degree, aligned with British interest. Now it no longer aligns with British interest. It's interesting they've been shut down, they've gone away. So Britain uses the far left and the far right and even terrorist forces in this country to its own ends. They see them, again, when they're in line with British interest, and when they're not, they shut them down. And that's the same with social media. I have no doubt in my mind the British government and anybody other government can use social media better than anybody else, can control it better than anybody else, can set up whatever they want, can pay people off, can manipulate them to get them to control the narrative. There is no doubt in my mind that's the case.
The UK's political system has been repeatedly strained by threats from fake news, according to the politicians investigating the impact of social media on recent elections. Yet those who run social networks give the impression of being unconcerned. Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg failed to come and give evidence, sending more junior staff instead. And while the committee clearly believes action must be taken, there is no guarantee that anything will actually be done to deal with the problem. Members of Parliament have said it's time for the government to act on the issue, which creates a serious democratic crisis for Britain, stating there is a relentless targeting of hyper-partisan views which play to the fears and prejudices of people in order to influence their voting plans. Our democracy is at risk, and now is the time to act, they warned. But nobody is acting, and because of this, if the process of politics is compromised, British democracy only has itself to blame.